Welcome to Geeks and Jocks, a podcast that focuses on video games, film, television, and sports. And now, for the person who is in charge of this podcast, here is Ryan Sullivan.
Hello and welcome back to Geeks and Jocks, and this is episode 9, and I'm going to be discussing the Super Bowl a bit, which, if you were to talk to me about this game, I wouldn't have thought this would be the outcome. And for New England beating the Los Angeles Rams 13-3, that game has got to be the worst Super Bowl I have ever watched in my entire life. And that says a lot because I've seen at least a few games that had some high scoring affairs and they were considered the worst. I would say 2000, the Baltimore Ravens with that phenomenal defense. And actually, it is defense is dominating. Baltimore dominating on the New York Giants in 2000. The 2002 season, Tampa Bay mercilessly beating up on Oakland. I think it was like 3 pick sixes in that game. And 2013, the Seattle Seahawks manhandling the Denver Broncos. And even with that, the first play of the game, safety in the end zone, 2-0 Seattle. But anyway, that game, New England and Los Angeles, it was very boring. It was unexciting, and it did not do anything good for the first 3 quarters of the game. I mean, the offense showed up a little bit in the fourth quarter, but it was still a mediocre quarter, and it doesn't excuse the 3 quarters before it. It doesn't. There's no defending around this because there was no effort. And I guess we'll start off with the Rams because, I mean, I was expecting them to at least put up some points, more than 3, because I figured they would get the jitters out and then show up a little bit, but it didn't. Really, the run game, I think that will be talked about for a good while. I mean, Todd Gurley, whether he was healthy or not, I don't know. I mean, he showed up a little bit in the fourth, but it was still not a good performance at all. C.J. Anderson wasn't really there for the game. I mean, he had some decent runs, but anything special. Jared Goff, I mean, it's playoff inexperience, you know. I mean, even though this is his second year in the playoffs, I mean, it's the jitters, being in the biggest game ever. And I would say he didn't have the greatest performance out there, but there's a lot worse. I mean, he did not do as bad, but still not a great completion percentage and 1 interception. I mean, that interception was critical. But at the same time, I think even if they were to score, the Patriots could have easily put up a field goal, pretty similar to the end of the game that they had back in the 2001 season. That Super Bowl's 17 years ago. But anyway, I mean, you got to give the defense a little bit of credit, but at the same time, it's like, you know, you got to fault the offense because, I mean, the defense can be very good, but when they're on the field for so much longer, I mean, they get tired out, and it led to that. Honestly, it led to that drive where Sonny Michel ran for that touchdown in the fourth quarter, which was the only touchdown in the game, and that's sad. Which, I mean, we'll talk about New England for a minute. I mean, Tom Brady, he didn't even have a great game. I mean, sure, that one drive was decent, but his efforts just weren't really there, and threw for over 200 yards, and most of his yards went to Julian Edelman, who I believe was named the most valuable player of the Super Bowl. 10 catches for, I think, 141 yards. In the likelihood of his last game, Rob Gronkowski, 5 catches, I believe he had like 58 yards. Well, actually, he had more. He had like 6, probably 80 yards or something. I gotta look at the final stats on that one. But I know Edelman's stats quite well, 10 for 141. And there was actually something debate on whether or not he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And my take on that, absolutely not. Because his regular season stats are not good. Even with the last 6 years or so, I mean, it doesn't excuse the lack of production in his first 4 years, which he was a seventh rounder Edelman in 2009. Started off okay with like 350 and a few touchdowns, and then barely catching anything the next 2 years. 2012, getting a little more attention, and then becoming the full-time receiver when Wes Welker left for Denver following the 2012 season. And his numbers are not the greatest as far as looking at the last 6 years, and that includes missing out in 2017 because of his ACL injury, I believe, or knee injury, one or the other. And his stats so far for the regular season, career-wise, I believe 5,300, near 5,400 yards receiving, and 30 touchdowns. That's not good. Now, I'm sure he'll be talked about for ages to come about his playoff stuff since he is second all time in catches. But regardless of what he did in the playoffs, his regular season stuff isn't anywhere close to Hall of Fame caliber. Maybe it is 40 years ago, but with how pass happy the league is and all that, it just overall absolutely not. Edelman does not belong in the Hall of Fame unless he finds a way to magically get like, I don't know, 12,000 yards. And if he even decides to stay another 10 years, which I put serious, serious doubts into that. Which I think one of the funny things into that, getting into the beginning of the Super Bowl, was running the ball like exclusively early on with Sonny Michel. I mean, for what the guy did, I didn't realize he had that big of a playoff run. I mean, which says a lot because I don't know. I always view New England as like more of a pass happy team, and just I mean they've had decent running backs in the last 18 years, and that I mean they've had Antoine Smith, who had some years with Buffalo, but he had some pretty good years with New England. Corey Dillon, who still was playing pretty well despite playing most of his career in Cincinnati. Then there was like Lawrence Maroney, Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. I mean, those guys were doing okay. Stephen Ridley, which honestly was a one-hit wonder, 2012 season really. LeGarrette Blount, I mean, I think that was a big mistake not keeping him for 2017. But to have Sonny Michel be your lead guy, I mean, he actually had a pretty good year, a lot better than you think. But his stats for the playoffs, I mean, it's like it's not the yards, but it's definitely a Terrell Davis and John Riggins type of year. I mean, 6 touchdowns for the postseason. I mean, you don't see that out of a rookie. And for what I mean, I hope this is a guy. Despite my disdain for New England, as much as I think they are a corrupt franchise, this is a guy they have to keep because even though I wasn't born around when Super Bowl 25 happened, I saw a bit of like an O.J. Anderson type of thing, which is pretty fitting considering that was Bill Belichick's team, the New York Giants, which, I mean, they won that Super Bowl thanks to Belichick and the run-happy offense of Bill Parcells and Ron Earhart Perkins, to be exact. I mean, that's how Anderson got his MVP. Honestly, I think Michelle could have gotten the MVP, to tell you the truth. I mean, he ended the game with like 94 yards rushing and a touchdown. But regardless, I think it would have been you know. So I think as far as looking at this entire playoff spectrum, I think there's going to be a lot of things discussed by the time we start getting further into the into the off season. And I think they'll definitely be looking at whether to review pass interference calls or not. Because I'll tell you this, I think it's kind of a good thing, despite my hate for New England, that New England won. Because if the Rams had won the Super Bowl, there would be a lot, and I do mean a lot, of pissed off New Orleans Saints fans. There really would. Because the way that end of the game was, I mean, yeah, that was a blatantly missed call. Really bad. And actually, that was one of the few bright spots, I think, for the Super Bowl, was that they actually called the game pretty fairly. I mean, that says a lot because to be marred with controversy a few weeks ago, I mean, the fact that there was threats on the referees to the point where they had to move to another hotel, the NFC ones, I mean, that's horrible. But I got a feeling they're going to be looking at whether to review pass interference calls. And, I mean, it could go, I mean, it's a double-edged sword in a way because, I mean, you're looking for the missed calls, and you want to make sure that the game is called fairly. But at the same time, you're delaying a game, and unless it's simple, you take 30 seconds and you say, after review, the play stands, the play is overturned. I mean, it's going to cause issues. And overall, I don't think, I don't know, it could go either way. I think it could help. I think it couldn't, regardless. And I think at the same time, I think they're also going to look into, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think they will look into a little bit of the Kansas City New England game. There wasn't really anything controversial, but I do think it might, but I'm not sure if they'll do that. They'll probably do look into overtime rules for the playoffs, or at least try and do like, because a lot of people, and even myself included, thought maybe there should have been a the thing I look at is whether they'll do two possessions, one for each team, because I think a lot of people felt like Kansas City didn't get a fair chance, and some people might be thinking, what about the New Orleans game? Well, Drew Brees had the ball first, and he threw it for an interception, and the Rams got it, and that's how they won the game. And I think that's where the line. I think that's where the NFL drew the line on that, because actually I'm gonna go back to that Saints Rams game. I mean, now certainly you could tie a game with a minute 40, and I think you could actually tie a game with 20 seconds left on the clock. I really think you could, because I mean, penalty or no penalty, I think the Rams would have had a chance to at least tie it up. The 20-second thing, it would have been a risk, but honestly, you could have a chance to tie it and force overtime. So it's not like the Saints were given a bad hand. They had a chance to march down the field and score a touchdown and get sent to the Super Bowl. But even then, I mean, a Saints Patriots Super Bowl would have been much better. Or even a Saints Chiefs Super Bowl would have been much better. Seriously. But anyway, back to the Kansas City New England game for a sec. I think having a game, an overtime game where both teams get the ball, like a college, like what college does. But I think you have to do this. This is what I think. I think both teams get a chance to score a touchdown, and after that, the next score wins. So it'd be similar to like the field goal situation. If both teams score a field goal, the next score wins. That's what I think. I think if someone fumbled the ball and the defense recovers, interception, blocked kick, I mean, I think it's fair game, and whoever scores, whether it's the recovery from the offense, if they find a way to score, they win it, or if the defense picks it up and scores, they win. Um, I think it's a pretty complicated thing, and honestly, I'm not sure if they'll even consider that. I mean, it's something to talk about at the very least. Um, so I think as far as other stuff goes, I'm gonna say this: I did not watch the halftime show. I did not watch commercials because It's nice to have a TV where you can change the channel and find other stuff on cable, like World Series of Poker, a rerun of it, and finding other stuff like movies and TV. Honestly, I think commercials now these days, it just seems like they're just getting dumber and dumber by the day, which is a shame, really. Really is. But yeah, my thoughts on Super Bowl 53, as I said, worst Super Bowl ever that I've ever watched. And just boring, unexciting. I mean, yeah, New England gets its sixth trophy, but for what? So people were bored, be bored 4 hours later. And it just adds another part of their controversial legacy. That's all it comes down to. And with that, I'm going to talk about the Hall of Fame for the NFL, which is interesting because four defensive backs went into the Hall of Fame, and they are Ty Law, who had a pretty good year, pretty good career with New England. He was a mid '90s draft pick, and he spent I think like 14 years in the league. I'll have to take a look at that, but he led the league in interceptions twice, and he did very well. And he was like one of the key factors to the first Super Bowl of New England. And he spent 15 years in the league. For his career, 53 interceptions. I think that's roughly where Deion Sanders' stats were in a way. But five-time Pro Bowler, two-time All-Pro, was a part of the first three Super Bowls in New England. And I think after that, he went to a couple other teams, played for the Jets, Kansas City, and Denver. And actually, let's see, was a 9 interceptions in '98, led the league for New England, led the league in '05, 10 with the Jets. Not too bad of a career. I mean, definitely some touchdowns for sure. 7. Let's see if there's any fumbled touchdowns. Nope. Massed over 800 tackles, about 700 solo, and just over 130 assisted. And the next guy, Champ Bailey, who I believe played initially for Washington, but then went on to play for Denver back in 1999, drafted by the Redskins. Had a pretty good career, really. I mean, 52 interceptions, a 7th overall pick. I didn't think it was that high of a pick. I don't even remember Washington being that bad. But anyway, much like Law led the league in interceptions, that was in '06. Oh, he spent a long time with Denver. Spent 10 years with them. After spending 5 with Washington. Actually, some pretty good stuff. I mean, I think they look overall at the probably like a feared tackler in a way. I mean, massed over 900 in his career, 800 solo, and a little over 800 solo, and 96 assisted tackles. Pretty good amount of Pro Bowls, I believe, is 12-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. I mean, 52 interceptions. I mean, stats are roughly similar. They really are. They really were looking into how good some of these players were, and I think in the case of Law, I mean, this was definitely his best chance to get in. There really wasn't any notable players really that had any other big chance to get in. And the other guy, as far as the modern day secondary guys, Ed Reed. Now I'm sure this guy. I mean, you could talk about this guy all you want. First round pick, '02, Baltimore guy. I mean, this guy part of that feared Baltimore defense, and I'll tell you what, you buy into the Baltimore Ravens, and they they become one of the most feared defenses. And actually, I mean, he put up a pretty good career as a safety, Ed Reed. I mean, look at some of them. I mean, like this guy put up some pretty good interception yards, especially within his first 3 years in the league. I believe it's like 9 interceptions in 2 of the seasons, 8 1 year. Actually, those those 3 years, I mean, those were when he led the league in interceptions. Actually, that's funny. '04 was Reed. '05 was actually Ty Law, and then '06 was Champ Bailey. Ain't that funny? um, winning the Super Bowl in 2012, nine-time Pro Bowler, five-time All-Pro. Not much of a tackler, but pretty good ball hawk guy. I mean, 64 total interceptions for his career. His yardage, as far as that goes, is 1,590, which is very, very good. Actually, some of his returns, 107 yards. That's something you can't replicate, especially with the way the league is now these days, where it's like, hey, just do a safety. Like that's. I mean, it's a huge gamble. If I could get that in for a touchdown, that says a lot. We'll look at this next guy, Johnny Robinson, and he was part of like the AFL, I believe. He was a player for the Chiefs, and I believe he won the Super Bowl with the Chiefs. Let's see, seven-time Pro Bowler, six-time All-Pro, three-time. Oh, he was. Forget about the whole AFL championship and NFL championship thing. I mean, he played for a few teams. I think it's trying to think, see what I do. Like Detroit Texans, I think that's at least what I'm seeing. Dallas Texans, and then they became the Chiefs. That's strange because it doesn't show really any full stats. Maybe they might have something more in depth. I'll have to look at that later. Spent 12 years in the league for this organization and had some pretty good years, I guess. Looking at some of his AV, which is approximate value. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's see. He was a RS and an FS. So let's see. Flanker, defensive back. Yeah, I'm gonna look at the defensive back thing. Yeah, he was a very good defensive back. Actually led the league in interceptions a couple times. 57 within a 10-year span. I mean, that's very good. Like, it's interesting to see some of these old players that get in, and it just amazes me because there's some of these guys. It's like, how do some of them not wind up in the Hall of Fame? I mean, I'll be curious one day because I mean, there's a Dallas Cowboy who, even though he won a Super Bowl with the Giants, I wonder if he'll ever make it into the Hall of Fame, and that is Everson Walls. I'm not sure if he ever will. It's a shame, really, because I think he put up a good career despite the catch against San Francisco, which I hope people quit judging on that because it's like he built up a reputable career and redemption with a Super Bowl, even though it was with a rival in the Giants. So the next guy, and this one was pretty obvious from the get-go, Tony Gonzalez. This guy, I mean, pretty much modern day tight end, really, or brought in there where similar to Shannon Sharp in a way. I mean, more of a receiving back, more receiving tight end. My apologies, and put up some pretty good numbers for his career. 14-time Pro Bowler, six-time All-Pro. Did a lot of damage with Kansas City, and then going on to Atlanta. I mean, really, I mean, his stats were very consistent when he went to Atlanta. Always, a threat for 800 yards receiving, 6 to 8 touchdowns a year. I mean, guy was unbelievable. And 111 touchdowns. I mean, as far as tight end stuff, that is very legendary. Very, very legendary. Um, it's a shame if Gronkowski retires because I mean, but health issues. I mean, he could have Gronkowski, if he was healthy, he could have had a huge chance to be to break records of some of these tight ends, really. But Gonzalez, I mean, Kansas City, I mean, did very well. I mean, this guy's a legend for both the Chiefs and the Falcons. And a shame he never really saw the playoffs much because his numbers aren't really anywhere impressive. And looking at, I mean, his best year was that 2012 Atlanta season where they went to the championship game, only to lose to San Francisco. And the next guy is, I'm trying to figure out how you say his last name, but it's Kevin Malay. Hawaii, and he was a lineman for three teams. He played for the Seattle Seahawks at first, and he blocked for Chris Warren, who still had some pretty good years under him around that time. And that '95 season was his best year. I believe he ran for 1,500 yards, or maybe it was '94, one or the other. But he had some pretty good years with the Hawaii, and he had some pretty good years, as I said, with Seattle. Played some very good years with the New York Jets. When that was when they had Curtis Martin. He actually came to the Jets the year Martin came in 1998, and spent the entire time that Martin was there with the Jets. Even though injuries, looking at injuries for the '05 season, he actually got the block for Chris Johnson for Tennessee. Blocked for some pretty good rushers for Tennessee as well, especially to end your career on a season where 2,000 yards. I think that's something to be proud of. To be part of a 2,000 yard rusher team. I mean, that says a lot because very rarely, extremely rarely to be exact. I mean, there's Eric Dickerson, Barry Sanders, Terrell Davis, Jamal Lewis, Johnson, Adrian Peterson. I mean, it's just amazing for what they were able to do. And a couple of senior guys that they had was Pat Bowlen, who took over as the owner of the Denver Broncos way back in 1984, and he really had one of the most successful tenures ever as a CEO, as an owner of the Broncos. I mean, these guys were Denver was always in the running for being a contender regardless. I mean, looking at it, they've only had, let's see, I'm not counting 8-8 as a losing season, but let's see, one, two, three, like three losing seasons in 32 years, and they actually have him listed as an owner, as they say, managed by the Pat Bowlen Trust. But for what the team was able to do, I mean, John Elway early on in the run as an owner, I mean, their ability to run the ball consistently with a number of running backs, the defense, I mean, not much else you can like really say with that. And I'm just blown away by it, you know. It's just they've had a pretty good run as a team overall. Just not much else you can really say. And the next guy is Gil Brandt. He was one of those guys that he was in charge of the Dallas Cowboys. Or trying to look at his stats, but I mean, he was one of those guys that was there. I'm trying to find stuff regarding him, but he was there for the Dallas Cowboys from 1960 to '88. So pretty much there the entire time with Tom Landry and doing so much stuff with the Cowboys during that time. Which includes the two Super Bowls, NFC champions, winning division a number of times, the winning seasons. I mean, Ring of Honor, having all these guys. I mean, it says a lot because this was one of the great eras of football. I mean, America's team, where the Cowboys were actually a likable franchise until Jerry Jones took over in May of '89. I mean, that's a shame because the guy, I mean, all those guys really, I mean, they were crucial to the success of the Dallas Cowboys. And I mean, you think of those guys like Too Tall Jones, Staubach, I mean, Dorsett, all of them really. I mean, that was when you could like them. And now they're just pretty much an unlikable team because of Jerry Jones, unfortunately. I think that's about it on the Hall of Fame guys, at least. So the last thing I'll talk about is the Baseball Hall of Fame. Might as well get that out of the way. And they inducted four players, and we have the first unanimous ever. and that was in the form of Mariano Rivera. So Rivera, he started his career as a starter for the New York Yankees, and then he became a setup guy in the bullpen, set up for John Wetland, and 97 by 97 he became the full-time closer, one of the most legendary relief pitchers ever, and for him to get the unanimous is a huge deal because this guy Rivera, I mean, he had probably one of the most lethal pitches ever in his cutter, and he just was he perfect? No, but he was the guy that you could say defied all the odds and just the near perfection of what he was able to do throughout the regular season and the playoffs. I mean, the fact that the guy only gave up 11 runs in the postseason, that says a lot. Earned runs, to be exact. That says a lot. Like, this guy was unstoppable, and he was able to come in, day out, to get you those saves, and his 652 will be largely remembered. And also his entrance, Enter Sandman. Metallica even congratulated him, even though Rivera said he he doesn't he doesn't listen to them. It's just by choice, you know. And he actually has a teammate in him joining the Hall of Fame as well, and that is Mike Messina. Messina, he started his career with the Baltimore Orioles in 1991, and following that season, he went on a nice 8-year run, 9-year run actually, where he was always getting 10 or more wins a year, and his stats are actually not too bad. I mean, he did pretty well for Baltimore, and there was a funny thing I read, I believe it was when B.J. Surhoff got traded mid-season in 2000, and I think Messina was trying to help Surhoff out with trying to find like good medical stuff for Surhoff's son, and that was I mean he wanted to be an Oriole for life, Messina, and it was like, you know what, I'm gonna find another team, and he did with the Yankees, and he actually wound up having a decent 8-year run with them, and for him to end his career with a 2021 season, the first and only time ever in 2008. I mean, he knew when to hang up the cleats, and his career. I mean, 270 in terms of wins, about 2,800 strikeouts. I mean, which is 20th all time today. I mean, this guy could strike you out in many ways. He could fool you with many pitches. I believe he had like slider, cutter, a few forms of the fastball. I believe at some point he had a sinker too. But regardless, I mean, the guy was consistent. He was always capable of pitching some phenomenal games, and he had quite a bit of complete games during his time. And I think some of his postseason stuff, especially in the 2003 series against Boston, I mean, that is legendary for what he was able to do against them. And I feel like he was definitely had a chance to get it. I always felt like Messina deserved the Hall of Fame, quite frankly. Now the next guy, I'm not sure, but I think with his death, unfortunately, I think they had to honor him in some way, and that is Roy Halladay. And began his career in 1998, and his stats. I don't know how I feel about this because 203 wins and about 2,100 strikeouts. I think one of the things that gets him in a little bit is, definitely the Cy Youngs, which he won on both sides, which is a rare feat. Uh, the postseason against Cincinnati, having that no hitter, I think that adds quite a bit to his resume a little bit. The complete games, which, complete games are a rarity now as well. And for what he was able to do, 68 in his 16-year career, I mean, you don't see that really. I mean, and he did a lot of that later on when he was in his later years with Toronto and like the first year or two of Philadelphia. I mean, that I think definitely that's what will get him in. I was looking at his stats a little bit. It was definitely similar to Pedro Martinez, but a lot worse. And no doubt Pedro was the better one over Halliday, like in terms of stats overall. Uh, I think it's just trying to honor Halliday, which I mean he was a good pitcher. Personally, I don't think he deserved a Hall of Fame, or at least first ballot at least. But I think he would have had a chance, but it would have been slim. And the next guy, I think because of Harold Baines getting in a little bit, and I think this will pave the way for designated hitters as well, and that is Edgar Martinez, who first started in 1987, ended his career in '04. He started to pick up in 1990 and started having a few great years, and then he had an injury in '93, and then after the '94 season, he began on a good tear from like '95 through 2001, 2002. Like he was a guy that he was capable of getting the hits. He was getting plenty of home runs, and like this guy led the league in RBIs. Like this guy was just unbelievable with what he was able to do, especially late in his career, mind you. But for him to be designated here, I think it's a stigma, unfortunately, and I think this will pave the way for other designated hitters. I know in about 2, 3 years, David Ortiz will have his eligibility for the Hall of Fame, and unless I'm trying to remember, I know he was in steroid controversy, though I'm not sure if he was ever caught. But he had a pretty strong career. I mean, I think no doubt. I think if not first ballot, earlier eligibility will get Ortiz in, and because of guys like Baines and Martinez getting in, and I would say it will definitely elevate more once Ortiz gets in, if he does get in. So I think this is actually a pretty good Hall of Fame class. Messina, Rivera, Halliday, and Martinez. I think it's something to be really proud of, and I think there'll be a huge crowd in Cooperstown. But I think next year will be even more interesting when Derek Jeter gets inducted, because that will have a very huge crowd. Like I would say, could it eclipse the '07 one with Tony Gwynn and Cal Ripken Jr.? Maybe, but we'll have to wait and see. And with that, I will end this episode. This was episode 9 of Geeks and Jocks, where I talked about the Super Bowl, the Hall of Fame class for the NFL, and the Hall of Fame class of the MLB. And you know what? Hope you guys enjoyed this day, despite how bad the Super Bowl was. And I'll see you guys on the next podcast.